Hello everybody, it's Jade. This week we're doing a couple of things. First, we are covering Escape Velocity, which is the third book in the HIVE series. It's also considered to be the first good book in the HIVE series, which I'll get to in just a second. Another thing that we're doing this week is we are playing How Long Will Jade's Ridiculous Hairdo Stay Up? I already lost a piece and had to stick it somewhere else, so we'll see how things fall off as this video commences. Thirdly, so I did say last week that I was going to be doing 2 videos last week. Well, life just didn't work out that way, especially because I wanted to read this one at a slower pace so that I could make sure I could get everything right. So I'm going to be doing a second video this week. The second video this week is going to be on Interception Point. Interception Point, you say? What is that? Interception Point is the 3.5 HIVE book. And you may not have heard of it because it probably wasn't on some list of books in the series. This book is canon, but it is not considered essential to completing the series. And if you are a new fan, like somebody who started reading this series within the last 10 years, there's a very slim chance you will ever get your hands on a copy of this. It's extremely difficult to get. It cost me $20. So the original price was £1 because it came out on World Book Day. It cost me $20 because I got it like a couple of years after it came out. Right now, these things are going for $975. Yeah. So next week, or rather at the end of this week, I'm going to go over this one in excruciating detail so that for the 90% of you who are never going to be able to read this, you know what happens. And I'm also going to play a little bit of catch up. There's a bunch of stuff that I've kind of skipped over because these books are dense. I'm going to play catch up with anything that I feel like I missed as we go into the next arc. The HIVE series is kind of broken up into 3 trilogies of 3 books each. And as this is the end of the first arc, this one kind of sets up for the next arc. So I'm going to take the opportunity to just kind of wrap up anything that I feel like we need to get back to. Yeah. Also, Mitch is around this week. She's going to be talking about HIVEmind at the end of this one. Look forward to it. I will put that link in the description, or the timestamp in the description, in case you don't want to hear my recap. Yeah, so let's get started. So Escape Velocity is, like I said, it's considered to be the first of the quote-unquote good HIVE books. Now, we're all here because we like this series, unless you're just watching this because you don't want to have to suffer through them because you don't like them. But there are, other than Bloodline, there are considered to be 4 books that are weaker. That's 1, 2, 4, and 6, which 6 is very strong, but there's like one element that really resonates negatively with a lot of people. And then 3, 5, 7, and 8 are pretty much universally beloved, considered to be just hits every single nail on the head, almost impossible to dislike, the reason you're reading the HIVE series. And then 9, results are still coming in on 9 since only like 5 people on the planet have actually read it. And then 3.5 doesn't count because it's a half installment. Anyway, and so I think a lot of what can be attributed, I think a lot of the reason why this is considered to be the first truly good one comes down to a couple of different reasons. First, we're in full shonen mode. You remember how in the first video I talked about how a middle grade novel is supposed to appeal to like middle schoolers, early high school maybe, late elementary school, whereas shonen is supposed to just be able to be watched by anybody. That's where we're at now. This one's very Mission Impossible, but also like low on profanity, low on adult themes and stuff like that. This is supposed to be a more age agnostic book, which means anybody can pick it up and feel like there's something in it for them. There are a couple of points in here that I think were not executed perfectly, and I will call them out, but I don't think it's a result of the audience. The other thing is that, so I mentioned that books 1 and 2 are considered to be weaker, which I'll get to in a moment. This one, I feel like Mark Walden actually set out to write this one with the intention of it being able to stand by itself. The beginning of this one does a whole lot of recap. It explains who all the kids are. It explains what the Hive is. It explains what color each of the different jumpsuits are, even though that literally does not matter. It wants you to be able to pick up this book and understand what's going on. Now, I don't think that's a good idea. Book 2, I really enjoyed more than I remember enjoying the first time, because we only had 4 narrators. The 4 narrators being Otto, Laura, Nero, and Raven for I would say probably 95% of the book. And so we were able to get a lot of really good narration out of all of them. They each had an arc. Wing and Shelby also each had an arc. Nigel and Franz had a little bit of an arc. And we were able to sort of focus on the characters more. This one, here's a non-exhaustive list of all of the narrators in this book. Otto, Nero, Raven, Laura Wing, Pike, Miss Leon, Francisco, Nigel, the Contessa, Phalanx 1, Sebastian Trent, Diabolus, and Security Chief Lewis. Those are most of the people who narrate in this book. There is less... This book is more about the action. This book is more about the plot. There's a lot of sequences of, people shooting at each other, or Laura plugging in the ribbon cable into her little tiny laptop and typing commands in order to bypass the security, whatever, which we got in the last book. But we have to have a moment like that for each of the people that I just listed. Less character stuff happens in this one, but it still works because it is relying on the fact that you know who these people are. You care about them. You care about the risk that they are at various stages throughout this book. And if you just pick this up, you're like, all right, guns, shooty, hacky, data, MI6 stuff. And then at the end, HIVEmind dies, and you're like, well, rip to that guy, I guess. Without the emotional attachment that you get from reading books 1 and 2, which are all about introducing the characters, I don't think this worked. Now, this book is awesome. I'm not cutting down this book. I am cutting down the idea that you can just start with this one, which you can. You can absolutely just start with this one. You're just not going to care. Yeah. So... let's get on to some of the things that happen in this book. The big theme of this one, okay, there's a lot of big themes in this one, but something that I want to point out in advance of starting the actual plot is that the main characters in this win just about every single battle, but end up losing the war, which is just an interesting pattern that I didn't notice the first time. Anyway, so we open on Nero and Raven walking around in London, and they meet up with our old buddy Grigory Leonov. Remember the guy at the beginning of the last book who was gushing about how much Nero helped his son? Yeah, that guy. Apparently the Reapers, who are people sent by Number 1, came and killed his family because Grigory Leonov found out Number 1's dark secret. And then right as Grigory is about to spill the secret, he gets shot in the head. And oof. Anyway, so Nero tries to obviously get away. Raven tries to save him, but he is captured by some douchebag named Sebastian Trent. I can't wait to get to Sebastian Trent. And Raven tries to save him, but Nero tells her to leave, tells her to save herself. Not before, well, immediately before she is shot and falls into the river. presumably never to be seen again. And I want to take just a second before we get to Sebastian Trent to talk about something that was going on in the fandom somewhere around 12 years ago. So the opening sentence in this book is, "The bustling crowd appeared to part before the couple as they strode purposefully along the riverbank." The couple referring to Nero and Raven. I think now is as good a time as any to bring up that when the series first came out, the entire fandom was obsessed with shipping Nero and Raven. And this never happens anymore for reasons, but the fact that Nero sacrifices himself to save her here, sort of, to an extent, is basically the only piece of evidence in the entire series of that even being a possibility. So I just wanted to point that out as a little piece of fandom history about this saga. Anyway, moving on. So what happens here is that Nero is captured by this dude named Sebastian Trent. And Sebastian Trent is the lead of this group called HOPE, the Hostile Operative Prosecution Executive, which is probably, I think it's my favorite acronym. Actually, I think it's definitely my favorite acronym so far. I'm trying to remember if we get any more that I like better, and none of them are coming to me. But it's entirely possible there's another one, but it's super cool. They have this like angel holding a sword flying into the sky logo that I was going to make a t-shirt of and I didn't. Yeah, and see, when I was a kid, I didn't really catch most of the political references in this series. There are a couple of references to politics that I saw as just references, when in fact it is Mark Walden being extremely blatant about his social commentary. For example, Hope kidnaps Nero and then plasters his face all over national television and all over the newspapers and stuff. And they basically just claim, like, we are part of the war on terror. We know you've never heard of our agency before, but we promise that we are trustworthy and we are definitely, doing the right thing and stuff. Also, see this guy? We're not going to tell you anything about him, but you hate him. And the entire planet just goes, yep, that guy sucks. And so the idea is that now Nero can basically never go outside into public again without being recognized, which sucks. But it doesn't really matter because Nero is in prison for basically his entire book. And so we cut to 3 months later where Pike is currently serving as the head of HIVE. Pike actually gets a fair bit of actual narrative time at the beginning of this book, and he just seems like tired. You get the sense that running the HIVE really takes a toll on him. And we saw how much, and I wish I had mentioned this last week, but we saw how much love Nero put into his job in book 2. It says that in his office, he has a bunch of like newspaper clippings of accomplishments of graduated HIVE students and stuff like that. And even though it's probably very stressful, it is at least the career that Nero chose. Pike, on the other hand, is a scientist. And even though he's willing to lead the HIVE, he is ready to no longer lead the HIVE as soon as possible. Well, that is until somebody else takes his job. But anyway, so I'm going to go over everything about the kids right now because the kids actually get almost comically little focus in this book. So we cut to Otto, and he has, between books 2 and 3, developed an entirely new set of superpowers. Which we find out here that there has been a time jump of roughly 2 years since book 1. So now the kids are 15. throughout this series, Mark Walden is going to lose track of how old the kids are many, many times. However, I will be using the amount of time that he specifies between books as the canon ages of the characters, and not however old he says they are, because it makes no sense. Anyway, because it has been 2 years since book 1, the kids are now 15. Otto is trying to, access the school network Tron style, with his brain. So he can see these, passageways that data is traveling in, and he sort of knows what the data is, but he can't really affect it. And apparently he has an extremely, extremely limited control over being able to at least duplicate some data. And he gets the file that he's looking for, but Wing shakes him awake, and we see that Otto has been trying to gain access to this file literally all night, and it is now morning, and his face is covered in blood, and he's all nose bleeding and stuff. But he's very excited that he got access to this file, because he's finally made some headway with this new psychic ability that he apparently has, which I don't think anybody reading this series was bothered by the fact that Otto developed this between 1 and 2, because it seems like, A, there was a lot of boring nothing happening as far as this actual power development, but B, there was enough hints that there was something going on with Otto in books 1 and 2 that when he has powers in 3, we're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. It turns out that the file that Otto was looking for was the copy of his final exam that he's supposed to be taking next week. And so if it was just a final exam, why was he going to all that trouble to do something that apparently hurts him and he doesn't really know how to do or what effect it has on him? Yeah, he was trying to impress Laura. Anyway, so Otto seems to be fairly weirded out by the fact that he can apparently psychically interface with computers, but not weirded out enough to not do it, even when everybody is literally begging him, please stop doing this. At one point in this book, he actually has a seizure from trying to access this giant data file, and he's like, man, that was rad. I love Otto. Anyway, so the two boys go downstairs because there's this big assembly that they're having about the fact that they're going to be getting a new headmaster. And we see really what has happened in the past year and a half between 2 and 3. And that is that the kids have become much closer with one another. Their dynamic is even more friendly than it was previously. Every interaction that they have with each other throughout this entire book just oozes with the fact that these 4 kids have spent every waking moment with each other for the past 2 years. So we see that Shelby is constantly trying to get on Otto's nerves by sneaking up behind him, and then Wing has also sort of been doing this. Shelby and Wing have they don't argue anymore. They just kind of look at each other and have this understanding about everything they're gonna do. Laura is constantly aware of, Otto and Laura are constantly kind of watching each other and seeing hey, are you doing okay? Are you doing okay? Because Laura has anxiety, which was kind of or has something like anxiety, which we kind of saw in the previous 2 books, but now that they've been spending time with each other, the kids are kind of more aware of the fact that this is what Laura is like. And so every time Otto talks when Laura is around, he's always things are going to be okay, we're going to be fine. And he's always watching his tone because he's used to having her on his team. It also seems to stem from the fact that Shelby does the opposite. Just to get on Laura's nerves, she's oh my God, guys, we're going to die. And Otto's no, we're not going to die. Everything's going to be fine. And Shelby goes, oh, this looks really dangerous. And Laura's I'm going to puke. It's funny, but also kind of cruel. Shelby, please stop. And so you just get the sense that the kids love each other. And it's not just that the two boys are really close or that the two girls are really close anymore. It's that all four of them each have these interactions with each other that are really charming. And like I said, this is why I don't think you can really enjoy the series if you start with book 3. I mean, okay, you can enjoy the rest of the series if you start with book 3, but if you start with 3, you're going to think that 3 is kind of boring and then just kind of like get into the groove as the series goes on. The kids are called into this assembly where they watch the video from Sebastian Trent where they learn that, Nero has been captured and they're getting a new headmistress and all this stuff. Oops, spoilers, it's a lady. And Wing and Otto start talking about how they are really disappointed that Nero isn't coming back because they really love him. And I totally forgot at the end of last week to talk about the fact that Otto and Wing decided to stay at the Hive at the end of book 2. But we're going to talk about that in Interception Point, so we're going to skip over that. However, one thing we are going to talk about is this little internal monologue that Otto has where he talks about Nero's philosophy on leadership. So Nero apparently told the Alphas at one point that it's not important to be loved by the people you're leading. What's really important is that they are afraid of you or respect you in some way. What's really important is that they do what you say, however you need to get there. You don't need to be loved. And this speech is basically what's examined over the course of this book. Because Otto thinks to himself, yeah, that doesn't exactly sound right. And we see a variety of leaders throughout this book that really reflect this. For one, we have Otto himself. Otto isn't exactly the leader of their little group, but he kind of is. It's sort of like an unofficial leader. And like I just said, it's obvious that the other kids in his group really do like him and want to listen to what he has to say. We examine Contessa, who is the headmistress that replaces Pike. And as much as she is one of the most powerful people on the planet, everybody hates her and they end up staging a coup. We have Diabolus, who runs the Megalodon, or who pays for the Megalodon and decides where they're going and all the missions they do. And it's really obvious that everybody really, really likes Diabolus and they want to follow him. And Diabolus has achieved a lot of success. We've got Nero, whom everybody is loyal to, despite the fact that he claims he doesn't need the love of his teachers. It's clear that they do really genuinely care about him. And then finally we have Number 1. Number 1, who is playing all sides and is willing to off people at any possible chance, is ultimately betrayed by lots of Glove members because he didn't really try to maintain their loyalty through anything other than fear. So yeah, that's the main idea there, and then we'll call it out if we come across anything else. Another thing that's really interesting about Trent is that he's a really grounded villain, and I should have talked about this when I first talked about Trent. He's a ridiculously grounded villain for this series. We have characters like the Contessa, who is this woman with this ridiculous hairdo, and she can control people's minds and stuff. And then we've got Cypher, this guy with a mask that is a flat black mirror, and he has an army of robots. And then we've got Sebastian Trent. Sebastian Trent, who just runs a 4-letter government agency, and he calls the Hive ridiculous. He runs a regular prison. He's just a dude with a bad haircut, and he's more effective than a lot of people just by shedding all of the extra stuff that Glove members are so attached to. He wants to be he doesn't care about the drama that Nero is always telling the kids, you know, the benefit of being a glove member is you can be as dramatic as you want. Sebastian Trent doesn't care about that, and he gets a lot more stuff done. It's really interesting. I didn't think about this too hard before I started the video, Sebastian Trent himself, so I do want to track this as we go forward. You know, how much does each character stack up to Nero's values of having the cool costumes, having all the money and the lifestyle that you want, and being able to protect the things you care about at the expense of anything. Yeah. So Pike finds out that the new headmistress who is coming in to take over the school is the Contessa. And the interesting thing about the Contessa is that I would say in the grand scheme of the entire Hive series, which is like something along the lines of 2,800 pages total, the Contessa maybe comes in as the number 10 to 15 most important character. So she's not a main character. She's not a hugely pivotal character. But this week I was talking in this giant Discord group that I'm in about the fact that I was covering this series Hive on my YouTube channel. And somebody said, Hive, I read that when I was a kid. That has the Contessa, right? With the hair. Nobody mentioned any of the other characters. They were just like, oh yes, the Contessa with the big hair. The Contessa is probably Hive's most iconic character, and she dies in the 3rd book. I mean, out of the 4 good Hive books, she's only in one of them. And yet, when you ask a group of strangers if they've heard about this series, she's the person they think of, which is absolutely wild. I think it's because she has such a strong image, a striking aesthetic that is counter to what everybody else in the series is. You know, we've got Otto the cyborg, Laura the hacker, HIVEmind the computer, Overlord the computer, number 1 the cyborg. We've got 3 martial artists. We've got, you know, people like that. And then we've got the Contessa, who has mind control, and she smokes this long pipe, and she wears this, I always picture her in this like beautiful long black slinky dress, but I have no idea if that's what she's actually wearing. She's got the hair. You can instantly picture this woman, and the only thing it says about her hair is that it's big. It's interesting to me how her character concept is very simple. You can describe it in a couple of sentences, and yet she's so iconic. People really resonated with her. We've got characters like Otto. Like Otto's power set, or rather his second consciousness thing specifically, is legitimately not something I have ever seen in any other piece of media, ever. And yet, the Contessa is who people remember. Yeah. So the Contessa comes in, and she's effectively been sentenced to death by number 1, but she's been given one more chance. She can run the Hive, meet all of number 1's demands, and he will let her live as long as she keeps running the Hive effectively. And the one thing that he wants is Otto. Contessa decides, all right, well, what I'm going to do is get all 4 troublemakers out of the school, and then people will not realize that it's actually Otto that I'm after, which is actually a pretty good idea. So she gets the main 4 kids, and Raven busts in and gets them out. And there's this, oh my god, there's this absolutely hilarious bit. I think this book isn't particularly funny. Like, there's some of the books in the series are very funny. This one's not. But the funniest thing that happens in this one is, so the 4 kids are realizing that, oh crap, Contessa's gonna come after us. We have to escape. And they're like, all right, this is what we're doing. This is the plot of this book. We're gonna escape the Hive again. And you're like, oh yeah, we're doing book 1, but for realsies this time. And then literally like 2 pages later, they're just knocked out. And they're just dragged out. I'm not sure if that was intended to be comedic, but it is very funny. So Raven comes and gets the kids. They've been knocked out. She comes and wakes Otto up, and then she's about to leave without him, without the other 3. And he tells her, no, we have to take Shelby, Wing, and Laura. And there are 3 points in this book where Raven has to decide whether she is going to save somebody. And the rule is, effectively, if it's saving Nero, she cares a lot. And if it's not saving Nero, she barely cares. She does save Shelby later, but it's at a lower risk. Yeah, interesting. So Otto convinces Raven that they need to get all 4 kids out of the school. So she wakes the other 3 up. They run out and take a helicopter to leave the volcano. And so there's this really adorable bit where the 4 kids want to know where they're going. So and Raven refuses to tell them. So Otto goes up and sits in the cockpit with Raven. And he's like, please tell me where we are going, like what's going on. And she's like, no. We have to stick with the drama. You have to see this for yourself. I want you to actually have to see this with your eyes. And he's like, that's really annoying. Please just tell me. And then eventually they come across this giant submarine, and he's like, oh my God, look at that giant submarine. So he goes back down into the lower level, where the other 3 students are, and they're like, all right, so do you know where we're going? And he's like, yeah, but I'm not gonna tell you. You have to see this with your own eyes. We have to participate in the drama. So he picks up on Raven's mannerisms. It's very, very charming. I really enjoy the relationship between Raven and the kids in this series, because she's sort of defrosting to them over the course of the series. Like, you can tell that she has seen a ton of kids die. She doesn't really care about the kids as individuals. Not even as much as Nero does. I mean, Nero cares a lot, but she's been training Wing for like 2 years now in self-defense, and she just kind of leaves him at one point because it seems like it would be inconvenient to save him. But over the course of the last 3 books, she kind of grows to them as individuals, and actually cares whether they live or die. Not nearly as much as she cares about Nero, but she starts to see them as not just numbers. It's almost funny. Yeah. So Raven and the 4 alphas get off of the helicopter, fake their deaths, and then they are welcomed onto this giant submarine. And this giant submarine being the submarine that picked up Raven when she fell in the river and nursed her back to health and all that stuff. So this is where Raven has been staying. So that immediately tells us, all right, whoever is on this submarine, they're good guys. They're allied with Raven. They sent Raven to save the kids. We meet Captain Sanders, I believe his name is, and he seems just like a super nice dude. There's this little detail where he takes Laura's hand and helps her off of the helicopter and stuff. You get the sense that this guy is just he's a nice guy, and both Sanders and Raven are talking up the real owner of this submarine. And so eventually we find out that the owner of the submarine, through a lot of dramatic buildup, is Diabolus Darkdoom, one of my favorite side characters. I'd say he's like a medium tier importance character. Diabolus Darkdoom is this guy who is one of the most successful supervillains of all time. He has all this money and power and influence, and he has a giant submarine, and his name has been printed in textbooks all over the world and all that stuff. but you really get the sense that in another life, he would be just like a dad who enjoys grilling. Obviously he's Nigel's dad, but he's really caring, super nice. He uses his submarine to help the Hive. At one point, he talks to the kids about, here's what we need to do. We need to get into this thing called Deep Core, which is underneath MI6. We don't know how we're going to do it, so we think what we're doing is we're going to put somebody in deep cover and get them access to Deep Core over the course of the next 3 months, and then maybe we'll figure out where Nero is. And so Otto is like, actually, if you get me into Deep Core physically, I bet I can actually get the location out of that file because I'm psychic or whatever. And everybody's like, And he goes, yeah. And he demonstrates that he can shut down the entire submarine and then bring it back up and with his brain. And then, so we see Dark Doom like pull Otto aside and like go into like actual dad mode, like, hey, so are you doing okay, little dude? And are you sure that this doesn't hurt you, and you're sure that you want to go on this mission and that this is a thing you want to do and stuff? You really get the impression that this guy is like a cool person. Like, he's undoubtedly the team dad, while Nero is the team father. Diabolus is the dad. He's a really likable character. He also has a couple of really endearing habits, such as when he meets HIVEmind, he calls him infamous, and he means it as a compliment because he's a supervillain, and infamous is just a kind way to greet someone, like calling them a gentleman. Apparently, Diabolus was branded a traitor by Glove, but Nero didn't tell the children this. He taught them all that Diabolus is a good person. Good person. A person worth emulating. So that's kind of neat. So Diabolus sits everybody down and explains the entire plot thus far. Basically gives a nice recap. He does talk about the Overlord Protocol, which we didn't really know what the Overlord Protocol did in the last book, but he talks about what it is here. He says that it was the last component to Overlord and also the most important. And what it did was it would have allowed Overlord to get into any computer system. So he wouldn't have to hack things. He wouldn't have to figure his way around things. The Overlord Protocol can get to any piece of data if it is stored electronically. Doesn't that sound like somebody we know? I wonder. Anyway, also within this recap, we see that the bad guys are controlling the bad guys and the good guys. So number one is in control of Hope, which is this new government thing, and also Glove, which is effectively the Illuminati. It's this trademark Hive bleakness that, the human or the regular humans are sheep who are willing to believe anything Sebastian Trent says. Sebastian Trent is being controlled by number one. Number one is actually Overlord. Number one is in control of Glove and the EU, and and it's just this world that Mark Walden has created sucks. And I don't mean like the world building is bad. I mean, it's depressing. I'm so glad our world is not like this. So the group goes to MI6 and they split up. So the group goes to MI6 and they are able to break into Deep Core. They basically set it up so that they can get in, but they're not sure how to get out, and they end up having to like cause a bunch of explosions and stuff to get out. So it's not exactly a stealth mission, but they are able to get the data that they go in for. They come across these two, I guess I would call them adult Shelbys, named Constance and Verity, who are quickly dispatched by the team later, so I'm not even going to talk about them. We get this third version of the pipe scene. So the pipe scene in book 1 was where Otto and Wing were facing off against Block and Tackle. And it looked like they were going to win because Wing could take on both of them in a fight. But Otto accidentally knocked out Wing and then had to be saved by Raven. Then in book 2, we had the bit where Otto and Raven are facing off against these robots, and Otto is able to help Raven by controlling this robotic arm that swings a big shipping container and kills some of the robots or something, or knocks over this robot, better allowing Raven to kill it. I don't remember exactly how that one went, but Otto didn't try to help her in combat. He helped her in his own techie way. In this one, we get the third version of that. Otto and Raven are facing off against Constance and Verity. Constance and Verity incapacitate Raven by tasing her. And Otto is like, well, shit, now I'm by myself. Now I have to solve this problem by myself. And he is leaning against this car, and he is able to turn on the car, flash the headlights, and stun the two girls for a second, and grab their gun that was dropped, and then aim it at one of them and tell them that they need to back off or he's going to shoot them. And they tell him, your safety is on, trying to distract him, and he's like, no, I'm good with a gun. I know my safety is off. I'll shoot you. And it really shows just how much Otto has developed as a fighter since book 1, where in book 1 he almost got himself killed, and in book 3 he's able to actually protect Raven when she's down. So Constance and Verity go get into their own car, and then Otto and Raven get into this souped up car that they find, and there's this hilarious little moment where they're both geeking out over this extremely fast car with rockets and stuff, and then they run off and fake their own deaths in a river. So now we're going to cut back to the teacher plot. So the teachers take up a lot of time in this book, but ultimately their plot is pretty straightforward. We do get to see a lot of the teachers interacting with each other instead of with the kids, though, which is really valuable because, in the first book, the only thing we knew about the teachers is that they kept threatening to kill the kids. Yeah. In this one, we see them talking to each other, and they seem to really actually care about the Hive. They seem to really actually care about the different subjects that they teach, and they care about Nero. So they decide to start staging a coup. They help HIVEmind get off the island in a robot body. So HIVEmind is later able to actually catch up with the Megalodon. The Megalodon is the name of their submarine. Because the Contessa wants to kill HIVEmind, and the teachers at this point actually do care about HIVEmind, which is another thing that happened in the past year and a half of time skip. Previously, everybody was like, oh my god, I can't believe we have to work with this robot. Whereas now they seem to have actually gotten used to him, and they appreciate him more, and that ultimately leads to what HIVEmind does at the end of this book, which is, sacrifice himself for the good of humanity. Because the humans have actually started to appreciate him, they appreciate him, and therefore he appreciates them in return. At one point, Miss Leon gets seriously burned, and Nigel has to, carry her around in his backpack. And I just have to say something. So, I understand why Nigel has been relegated to do-nothing duty. Remember how I said in book 1 that Nigel was too much of a Neville Longbottom XP, and people kept commenting on it? Well, because of that, Nigel doesn't do anything basically anymore because he can't be the plant guy. His primary role in the series is to be Diabolus Darkdoom's son, somebody that Nero cares about because he's friends with his dad, that kind of character, as well as, anyway, we'll get to that later. But he doesn't really have any useful skills anymore because his useful skill, which is working with biology, was shut down by the critics. or shut down by Mark Walden's pride. I'm not sure which. I don't want to tell authors how to write their books, but Nigel should have been a medic. I will die on this hill. The kids are getting hurt all the time. The adults are getting hurt all the time. There is no medic. The kids mostly just kind of take turns asking each other if they're okay every time they break something. Nigel should have been able to do some amount of medicine so that he can be useful. All the other kids have useful skills except for Nigel. He sticks out like a sore thumb. Franz gets a really badass scene, but we're going to talk about Franz in Interception Point. So the teachers start to plan this coup, and at the same time, the Contessa is surrounded by what's called the Phalanx, which is number one's personal guard squad, and they are supposed to do whatever Contessa says, unless she does something that number one doesn't want, in which case they're supposed to kill her. The Phalanx also can be called stormtroopers. They are made out to be these massive badasses, but then throughout the rest of the book just kind of get clowned on by everybody else repeatedly. Yeah, which the teachers actually come up with a good strategy for defeating the Phalanx. I'm not saying that the Phalanx are incompetent. I'm saying that after their first victory, the Phalanx lose repeatedly. Yeah. However, once the Contessa turns over back to the good side, the Phalanx are effectively done for. The thing about having a mind controller on your team, especially one as powerful as the Contessa, is that she's effectively an I win button. It's pretty impractical for everybody to be wearing noise canceling headphones at all times, and therefore the Contessa basically wins. At one point, she mind controls 30 people at the same time. So what happens is the Contessa loses Otto twice, and so number one decides, well, I'm going to kill all of the alphas. Now, it seems unclear whether he was going to kill the alphas all, at first, but he decides that he is going to kill them. And this is when the Contessa starts to realize, hang on, maybe I'm working for the bad guy. Yeah. No, she starts to have a crisis of faith because the entire series she's been working for somebody else. In book one she was working for Nero. In book two, though, she sells out to Cypher, and then in book three she's completely under the control of number one. And I think she realizes at the end that she could have been anyone. She's completely at number one's mercy because she has nothing to lose. And therefore, she could have been any other death row prisoner. A toddler could have done her job. Okay, maybe not a toddler. The only reason she was kept alive was because she's useful, because she has the mind control. But even though she has mind control, she's never in control of her own life. She's never in control of her own destiny, which is the grand irony of the Contessa Sinister. So the Contessa finds out that number one is planning on killing all the alphas, or having the Phalanx kill all the alphas, by installing this thing that's going to gas the alphas as they are in a single block. And so she goes back and teams up with the rest of the teachers, and they take out the Phalanx, arrest them, and uninstall the nerve gas. Number one finds out about this and sends the Reapers, which are this group of armed men that they carry giant machine guns. They just go in and just kill everybody. And he's like, well, I thought that I was just going to kill all the alphas, but instead I'm just going to kill everybody at the Hive. So the Contessa, realizing that she's going to die either way, locks everybody out of the landing bay, floods the landing bay with jet fuel, sits on top of a crate, waits for the Reapers to start landing, smokes a cigarette, drops it, and blows the whole landing area. Her blowing up herself and all of the Reapers and saving everyone. And it's this epic scene, like dramatic. You see this woman who is effectively, she's been condemned for like a while. Like, we knew she was going to die. The question was just how. And she chooses to die as herself instead of just as a pawn of somebody else. And she dies holding a cigarette, which is how she was introduced. Instead of being a prisoner or being under the control of number one. So Team Diabolus decides that they're going to go after Nero, who is being held in this like prison in the Alps. And so they launch them, they load themselves into guided missiles and shoot themselves into the Alps. I have no idea how accurate this is, and I actually should know this one. But if it is accurate, then that's very worrying, because that means that Europe doesn't have a missile defense system. I used to work with the United States missile defense system, and the 2-second version of how that works is, somebody shoots a missile at the United States, we shoot a different missile at that missile and blow it up. So when our 7 protagonists put themselves in missiles and launch themselves at the Alps, if Europe has a missile defense system like America's, they would get blown up. So they go in and get Nero out, but everything goes sideways and they all get captured. Oopsie daisy. Number one calls down and says, well, I'm going to kill all of the alphas. Bring Otto and Nero to me and kill everybody else. So Otto and Nero are placed in this pod, and they don't know what it is, and are shot up into space. And the absolutely wild thing is, the really, really interesting thing is about this, is that means that HOPE, a government agency, has number one's location. They have a full mission control center and launch setup that they can access number one space station from, and Glove itself has no idea where number one is located. So, in other words, number one was actually tied more closely with the government than with Glove. That's wild. So the way the whole like railgun thing, okay, it's not a railgun, the way they're launched into space is an interesting idea, but not currently feasible. Now this is a science fiction story, so it's okay if not everything already exists. But basically, when we launch humans into space, we have to be careful that we don't go too fast, because if you accelerate too hard, the humans will get crushed. So we have to kind of accelerate somewhat slowly so that we don't crush them. The way that this launch system works is they have some kind of artificial gravity that goes in the opposite direction, that is pulling the passengers forward while they're being pulled back, to leave them in a sort of neutral gravity situation, which is a very interesting idea. However, the only kind of artificial gravity that we currently have any ideas for is the kind where we accelerate and we only use the natural gravity that comes from speeding up. So we don't currently have anything that would allow that to work. Now, if somebody has an idea for it, maybe. But right now we don't have anything. Maybe in the future this would be a viable idea. It is more believable. Okay. Yeah, it's more believable than somebody having mind control. So, yeah. By the way, the rest of the main characters who are being held by Constance and Verity, there's like 5 of them, I think, or 4, and so they easily overpower Constance and Verity and kill them. It's fine. So Otto and Nero are shot up into space, and they step out onto this space station, and the space station is described beautifully, but also this portion is the most beautiful writing that we've had in the series so far. They continued walking, following the hovering sphere in silence. The walls of the corridor they walked down were of the same brushed steel that was typical of many glove facilities, but they were illuminated by glowing red traceries of light which pulsed in time with a low, rhythmic thrumming sound that suggested massive generators operating somewhere unseen. Every so often, another window in the corridor wall would grant a brief glimpse of the dizzying view, the blue curve of the earth, bright against the inky black of space. Otto knew that they should have been floating down this corridor, but there was no sensation of microgravity, just a steady 1G holding him firmly to the floor. Yeah. So, Otto and Nero are walking down the space station, and there is this just incredible tension. And I think it comes from the extreme change in environment. We've always... A space station fits within the aesthetic of the series. And in fact, you probably could have guessed they were going to go to space from the fact this is called escape velocity. But space is never mentioned. It is not really foreshadowed in any other way other than the title of this book. So when they go to space, you're like, of course we're going to space. But it's so different than everything else. But it also means that Otto and Nero are completely isolated. Otto can't use his superpowers here. They can't receive help from anybody else. There doesn't appear to be another craft that can reach them. They're screwed. Number 1 is incomplete control. If any of these windows crack, they're gonna die. But also this facility is owned by Number 1. Yeah, it's stifling. It's stunning. There's a moment where Nero looks at Otto and says, "Look, you have to understand, I am going to kill that man, Number 1, even if it means killing you and me to get there." And Otto says, "Okay, no, I understand. Please do that. If you don't do it, I'm going to." Nero isn't some pretty idealistic knightly leader. He's a supervillain. He as far as he understands, all of his other alphas are dead. The last 3 other alphas, Laura, Shelby, and Wing, are about to be killed. And he is willing, and so Otto is the only alpha that is left. And he's willing, instead of wanting to protect Otto so that he has one last student, he's willing to sacrifice Otto to get revenge. And Otto agrees with him. Otto's like, "Oh yeah, no, absolutely, this guy needs to die." Which the reader at this point also wants Number 1 to die. But that's just sort of the headspace that you're in reading this. I remember when I first read the series, I was like, "Oh yeah, these are the good guys." I mean, this series is spineless. We don't see the bad guys doing bad things, and we don't really. But reading this more deeply, you can see how differently these characters behave from more heroic, idealistic characters. They may not do the same things, or they may do the same things as heroes, but It's because there's this concept called evil versus oblivion, which I'm really excited to get to when we get further into this series, but we're getting our first taste of it here. It basically says, yes, we're the bad guys. We want to take over the world. But if somebody comes and tries to destroy the world, we have to protect it. Because if somebody bombs the planet Earth, we live here. So in the case of overwhelming evil, the people that are normally the bad guys have to become the good guys. And that's what this series is about. This series is about what happens when bad guys face somebody worse. And that's why I like it. So Otto and Nero come up to number 1, finally, in person. It says, trailing from the chair were numerous cables and tubes filled with unidentifiable fluids. The 2 spheres floated over to the center of the room and docked with the sides of the chair. Nero walked towards the platform that this bizarre techno-organic throne was mounted upon, with Otto just behind him. As they approached, the platforms rotated and the chair turned to face them. My God, Nero whispered. Not yet, but perhaps in time, number 1 replied, which... Fine, I'll take a moment to explain the Jesus allegory. So, number 1 / Overlord wants to be God. That is what he wants. It is not explicitly stated, other than right there, but he wants to rule the planet. He wants absolute obedience. He wants to kill the alphas because he wants to kill the freethinkers, and he only wants to keep the henchmen because the henchmen are robots. He's going to replace all of the humans with duplicates of Otto so that he can have a giant HIVEmind. So there's a part of this that is a Bible illusion, right? So Overlord wants to be God. He wears white robes and lives in the heavens or space. He has a son. He has only one son right now, who was conceived without a mother instead of without a father, and is both all human and all machine. There's more to this Jesus allegory, but I lose it right about here, so we're going to pick this up at a later book, because I don't remember what else there is to this Jesus allegory. But I don't know, maybe that makes HIVEmind the Holy Spirit, especially since HIVEmind dies. But anyway, we get a pretty gross description of what number 1 looks like. He's a really old man, and he's been hooked up to a bunch of machines that have been like keeping him alive by pumping him full of drugs for the past who knows how long. And it turns out that Otto is actually a clone of this man. So, I want to talk about this plot twist. This plot twist is so good. Okay, actually, one more. Otto is a clone of this man, and this man has been possessed by Overlord for the past 15 years. They've been trying to prevent number 1 from rebuilding Overlord, but in fact, Overlord has been in control the entire time. He never died. I love this plot twist so much. I actually talked about it during my Pact video series. Pact is the other series that I covered on this channel that I covered like completely. It's a 3,600 page book that is about magic in the modern day. And there was a plot twist that happened in there that reminded me of this, and I had to talk about this because I love this so much. And I want to talk about why. The first book in this series, Otto spends the entire time talking about how, oh, I'm the greatest, and everybody else sucks, and I'm so smart, and I don't want to work with this Laura girl because she's going to slow me down because I'm so smart and stuff. And he thinks that he's just better than everybody. And everything that Otto has ever thought made him cool is utterly pointless. It was just something that was given to him to pacify him, to make him think, yeah, I'm the coolest. And so that he never thinks, oh man, maybe my organs are going to be harvested to save some ancient old man who's dying on a space station. everything that Otto thought made him unique is actually just engineered for somebody else's use. The things that Otto was doing to control the orphanage, number one / Overlord talks here about how that was bad. That was legitimately annoying, number one. Like, number one can't even look down and be like, ah, yes, that's my kid. He was like, that's really irritating. That kid is drawing too much attention to himself. We have to lock him in the hive so he doesn't cause too much trouble, or that people don't figure out that he's my clone. His entire life, instead of thinking, boy, it is so weird that I can do this, he thinks, boy, am I not just the absolute shit, and successfully tricks everybody else into thinking that too. But the chef's kiss about this is that number one is absolutely nobody. Number one is no one. He had literally one line in the series when he said, I'm finishing this, back in book 2. And everything else that he has said in this entire series was after he died and was just somebody else pretending to be him. Number one has literally been his corpse has been a meat puppet for the past 15 years, and nobody noticed. A couple people were like, this guy's acting kind of weird. But ultimately, nobody went, yeah, we really miss that guy. What's his name? I wonder if something happened to him. Because we don't even know what this guy's name is. Number one is a person that does not matter. The genes that Otto is made of mean nothing. If Otto's genes mean nothing, and his skills with robots and programming and all that stuff mean nothing, what does Otto even have that's his own? And that is his connection to his friends. But the thing is, you hear the power of friendship used as a joke all the time. The fact that Otto is, every anime uses, yeah, we can do this because we're friends or whatever. Or, I can do this because of the strength that I get from the people that I love or whatever. It feels so cheap. It feels so empty. But in this series, I think it really, really pulls it off because of just how hopeless Otto's situation feels. He was created to be a body for somebody else. He is the sacrificial pawn. His personality was supposed to die on his 15th birthday so that somebody else could take over his body and have the exquisite joy of being a teenage boy all over again. And so he has nothing except the connections that he has formed with other people. And it works. Because Otto is such a strong character, because we've seen how much he cared about Wing in the last book. We saw how he has this rivalry with Shelby. We saw how he is constantly trying to reassure Laura and ease her anxiety. We see how he's helping Raven with when they're in fights with Constance and Verity because he feels responsible. By the time you get to this point in the series, you either love Otto or you're not. You've given up reading it. And so the things that made you love Otto, you the reader, are these moments that I was talking about where he's helping the people that he cares about. And the other things that he's doing, like screwing around with the digital scape and stuff, he's doing that for the people in his life as well. And so when this comes around, when he loses his entire sense of self to the revelation that he is no one, you know what makes him who he is. And you know that thing is his connection to other people. and how much he loves them and how much he cares for them. Oh yeah, one last point about number one. The thing that got him killed, the thing that allowed Overlord to enter his mind, was the fact that number one went and tried to save a bunch of low-level technicians. He tried to do a good thing, and it got him killed. See what happens when you try to be a good person in this universe? What a loser. I have one major complaint, though. So at one point, and I'm complaining about this because I had this complaint when I was 13 when I read this book at first. So this isn't just a I'm an adult and this doesn't make sense complaint. This is a just plain this doesn't make sense complaint. So I have been able to explain most of the technological references throughout the series. I've been able to say, oh yes, this robot would be realistic. This robot would be realistic. The way Laura is doing her homework here makes sense. How did Overlord possess number one? He struck him with lightning. Overlord struck Nero with lightning, and that lightning contained data. I'm sorry? What? Excuse me? That doesn't make any sense. But I'm willing to look past it because you still can kind of see it coming. So there's this moment where Overlord talks about how no humans will oppose him because humans are afraid and Overlord will be in control and stuff. And Nero's like, well, no, humans are all about rebellion. Humans will absolutely stand up to you. You can't create an entire planet full of mindless drones willing to do whatever you say. And the thing is, this message that Nero has is directly contradictory. I mean, and this is correct. Nero is saying a true thing here, but this is directly contradictory to Nero's one biggest character trait, which is that he's a control freak. He controls every aspect of the students' lives. He controls who they meet. He controls how they behave. He controls what they eat. Okay, he doesn't really control what they eat. He controls what time they get up in the morning. He's a control freak. And here he is saying, no, the humans will rebel against you. And I think this is starting to lean into what will become some really great character development with Nero. Because even though he has this desire to control others, that largely comes from the fact that he's a school teacher and therefore he needs to be in control of a bunch of 13-year-olds all the time. He has learned from that 13-year-olds will stand up to you and the 15-year-olds. It takes an inordinate amount of effort to be able to control the 500, 600 students that are at the Hive, let alone the 7 billion people that live on Earth. And so that's something that we're going to keep tracking throughout this. What is Nero learning about the way that he views the world and the way that he runs things? Overlord wants to create a bunch of little baby Ottos and possess all of them at the same time by distributing his consciousness across all of them, like a HIVEmind. So there comes this point where Otto realizes, oh shit, this entire plan hinges on me. Number one is about to die. Overlord is going to take over the planet if he's able to get my body. He turns to Nero and he says, kill me. Please kill me. Just kill me right now. And Nero's like, yeah, I understand why you're saying this, but this is hard. But he ends up actually wrapping his arm around Otto's neck and starting to choke him out. And so Overlord hits Nero with lightning, thereby, by the logic of this series, impregnating him. No. And then is preparing to kill him when HIVEmind takes a shot for Nero in the hopes of being able to, preserve the fight a little bit longer. And so Otto runs over and holds HIVEmind as he glitches out. and is able to pick up HIVEmind, well, HIVEmind's consciousness. And that leads to something that I do want to say. So part of Otto's power set is that or rather, the purpose of Otto's power set is that he can be possessed. He can carry around other people's consciousnesses in his brain. So he can carry HIVEmind with him, but also other people like Overlord can leap into his brain and possess him as well. This is a ridiculously interesting concept. I don't think I've ever seen this anywhere else. We've seen the idea of people getting possessed in magic books, but this is all about being able to carry an artificial intelligence and use that artificial intelligence to interface with other computers, stuff like that. And Hive itself makes a lot of references to a lot of different things like James Bond and Harry Potter and stuff like that. But this right here, Otto's second consciousness thing, is the only thing that I can say genuinely I think is entirely unique to this series. I've never seen this anywhere else. I read a couple of other books when I was a kid that were even about schools for supervillains. Even the whole concept of the Hive has been done before. But the second consciousness thing is entirely unique to this series as far as I can tell. And I think that's really neat. And we see a little bit of it here, but I'm going to wait to talk more about this until we see a little bit more of it. HIVEmind's dying words, well, before Otto takes him, is "You are as strong as you wish to be." And Otto takes this an interesting way. So you would think if this was a story about, say, Percy Jackson or someone else, in a way more idealistic story than this one, that he would say, "No, I'm not gonna let you possess me. I'm gonna stand and fight for my friends," or whatever. But the thing is, the only thing Otto knows at this point is that all of his friends are dead. And he's on a spaceship and he can't possibly escape, and no one is coming to help him. And Nero has just been struck by lightning, and his other friend, HIVEmind, just died. So he takes this inspiration of strength and uses it in the same way that the Contessa does. He chooses to die as himself. He turns to Overlord and says, "Fine, kill me now. Let me die as myself." I really adore Otto as a protagonist. He's someone that, when we first met him, was full of himself and thought of himself as being better than everyone else. But by the time we get to this portion of the series, he doesn't want to die. It's not that he wants to die. He accepts his own death for the purpose of the greater good, despite the fact that he is a bad person. And he's really not a bad person, but he hasn't done much good. He hasn't contributed much. But he tries to hang on to himself through every possible obstacle. He has an extremely strong personality, and not in a way that obstructs others, but in the way that keeps himself going. So Overlord just says, "All right, you're willing to die? Sick." Possesses him and takes over Otto's body. And then, and Overlord now starts fighting Nero. But what's going on in Otto's head is that because he was able to get HIVEmind, HIVEmind is able to grapple with Overlord inside Otto's mind. And ultimately, HIVEmind is able to take back control of Otto's body just for a moment and say, "Kill me. You have to kill me because I'm currently in control. If you kill me and Overlord now, you can get your body back. But if I lose control, Overlord will come out and you will never regain control of your own body. He says, "This is your mind, Otto, your body. No one but you has any right to be here. You can will us out of existence as long as I can suppress Overlord. But the moment that control slips, and it will, he will return and destroy you, me, and then every living thing he encounters. He's too strong. You have to do this now while you still can." I particularly like this line where he says, "This is your mind, Otto, your body. No one but you has any right to be here." This is coming immediately after the revelation that Otto was built to be a vessel for other people to inhabit. He's basically he is basically a sleeve from Altered Carbon, except he can't leave the sleeve. He just has to let other people use his body if they want to. So his bodily autonomy from here on out in the series is going to be in question. He has the opportunity to let people in to use his body and use his brain, but at the same time, people can try to come after him. And it's this really sort of terrifying power set. And I don't mean terrifying as in Otto is a scary person, which he kind of is, but it really is a power set that sucks to have. Like, this is like rogue level, good lord, nobody would want to have this. Yes, it's cool that he can open doors with his mind, but at any point, his evil dad can just be like, "Hello, son. I'm going to take your body for a spin," and there's absolutely nothing he can do about it. So Otto deletes Overlord and HIVEmind, and then he realizes that with both of them gone, something has happened such that he has way better control of his superpowers now, and he can interface with computers without having a seizure or keeling over, like he was having issues with at the beginning of the book. He contacts the Megalodon and summons them to come pick them up, and has Nero and he and Nero get into escape pod and go back down to Earth. And I just want to comment here that so part of the reason why Otto felt so hopeless was because he believed that everybody that he knew had died. And then at some point he finds out that they're fine, because we saw that, but he doesn't find that out on screen, and it looks like that was just something that was kind of skipped over. And I want to take this opportunity to bring up something. I would like to find whoever was in charge of editing this series. I want to have a long talk with them about what kind of time card fraud they were committing when they said they were editing this. Because as much as I really, really like this series, and I like the characters, and I like the concepts, the editing in it is basically as bad as I have ever seen any published book. The editing is atrocious. There's this moment in book 1 where Otto is accidentally called Oscar. Now, I know from an interview that Oscar was never like Otto's original name or anything. It was just a autocorrect thing or something like that. And in the original version of book 1, Otto is accidentally called Oscar once. Then there was this like orange cover version that was hardback that was published in America. So the first American edition was the version that I got at the library. And in the translation from European to English, they switched out all of the spelling of like color with a U to color with just an O. And they switched out the quotes from single quotes to double quotes to make it Americanized. But Oscar is still there. Now I own the copy of book 1 that is the most recent type. It's the illustrated American covers. They've got the black and neon coloration. So this is like the 6th version of this book that has come out. And it still says Oscar in book 1. This book came out like 15 years ago, and there was, I think, like 6 years between the first version and the American edition that I currently have, and it was never fixed. It's a problem that everybody knows about. You can read it one time and you notice it immediately. It's not a logic error. It's a typo that's been there for 6 years. Nobody fixed it. And it's still like that. The Kindle edition, if you buy it today, yep, Oscar's right there. You've got these little internal consistency issues where the kids' ages are all over the place. Here, Otto finds out that his friends are okay, and when did that happen? That I'm not blaming Mark Walden, because this isn't Mark Walden's job. Mark Walden's job is to come up with a story that is really cool and interesting, come up with the words. Then he's supposed to have an editor that says, hey dude, you've got a little issue here. Otto doesn't know this on one page, and then on the next page he knows it. Fix it. Whoever had that task, making this series, was asleep at the wheel. And it's obvious. Like, this isn't even the only example. I haven't been calling them out because I don't want to talk about the bad parts of this series, because I don't... When there are really, really bad parts, like, I'll mention them, like the thing in book 6 that I referenced here. But that's actually Mark Walden's fault. I don't want to blame Mark Walden for things like this that normally an editor is supposed to catch. And yeah, there's potentially going to be a TV show of this series, and I really hope it's good. And I hope it gets made. I don't have much hope for it, but I hope it does get made. And I hope that they're able to make another pass through the story and be like, whoopsie daisy, right here, we should have a little scene where Otto and Nero find out that everybody they know and love didn't get killed off screen. Yeah. So the book ends. Diabolus Darkdoom is voted the new head of Glove. And you definitely are supposed to feel like this is a total step up. Diabolus, we don't know about the bad stuff he's done, but we know a lot of the good stuff he's done. It seems like a really nice dude. Diabolus is able to tell his son that he's alive, and we get an emotional reunion. Otto feels melancholy about the fact that he now knows that he'll never have a family in the traditional sense. And Laura tells him, like, hey, no, you have us. But you don't really get the sense that Otto's like, you know what, that's right. Everything is just totally fine because I have my buddies. Like, he probably feels pretty bad. And he doesn't tell them about the fact that Overlord is his daddy. But he does tell them that HIVEmind died. We cut to 2 weeks ahead, and there's a memorial for HIVEmind and the Contessa. And it's a white pillar with a blue laser coming out, and the Sinister family coat of arms, which all I have to say about that is, good God, there's more of them. And we see Otto sitting in HIVEmind's data room, trying to connect, trying to see if there's anything left of HIVEmind in there, and there's nothing. He's been deleted. He's gone. He walks out, and we see a little flash of blue disappear. And that's escape velocity. So, yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Mitch now.
Science fiction often asks us, what if robots learn the power of good and evil? But I think the important thing about escape velocity is that it asks us, what if robots are gay? More on this to come. I'm Mitch from Dr. Nero is God on Tumblr, and thanks again to Jade for letting me crash this analysis video with my own opinions. Here we are, escape velocity. One of the best in the series, I think. Almost anyone would agree. But with that being said, there is so much in there to discuss that it is just a lot. And I think it's just like, in advance, it's gonna be a lot. Even if you try to narrow it down. Because this is like the bonziest book. And there are so huge stakes going on, and it's so interesting. And it will take 40 minutes to just, like, do anything. So we're narrowing it down to HIVEmind because I love HIVEmind. And then we have to consider that this is like his book, in my opinion. Like, this is HIVEmind's big starring moment, and we know it matters, but why? Let's think about that. And to aid in the condensement, the smallness of this video, I'll also have Jade drop a few links to some analysis I've previously done on HIVEmind and Overlord, and how all their stuff kind of works out in the book, like their identities as a function of their names, essentially. But TLDR, for those who don't want to read those, the point of that analysis is to come to the conclusion that HIVEmind's vital function in Hive is to bring people together, not as a collective consciousness, the way his name suggests, but as a connection to community within Hive. So I could prove that, and I have, but since I've already done it, I thought we'd move on to the more interesting stuff that I wrote 2 pages of notes on so that I could say this all in a reasonable order. So that's my premise going into this, right? HIVEmind's vital function is bringing people together, not in a collective consciousness, but as a connection to community within Hive. And now we're going to take it a step further with what we're doing today. So my next supposition is that HIVEmind connects Hive to the real world as well, and not just, for example, at the end of book 2 when HIVEmind connects to the internet for the first time, but rather as a staple element of the sci-fi genre. Having sentient robots, androids, artificial intelligence is an essential part of the science fiction genre, and I think what I wanted to start with was just a quick genre comparison, because the most interesting analysis we're going to get with HIVEmind is juxtaposing him against other robots type individuals that are present in the science fiction genre. So I will just go ahead with that, since I'm not super great at transitions, as you may have already picked up upon. So when we talk about robots, artificial intelligence, androids in the science fiction genre, and like scientifically those are all different things, but functionally they're not. They're just like people who are made of machines instead of organic material. And when that happens, it is often a Pinocchio-esque question that then pops up, which is, am I a real boy, per se? Am I actually a person, or do I just think I'm a person? What's all up with this? And there are a lot of examples of that being an important question, particularly when the robot in question is one of the good guys. So, for example, we have Ico from the Lunar Chronicles, and it is a staple of Star Trek. I think almost every Star Trek series has touched on this in some way, shape, or form, but to just name a few, the EMH, Emergency Medical Hologram, on Star Trek Voyager, and of course, Lieutenant Commander Data on The Next Generation are characters who really explore their humanity a lot. I might even say too much, but that is a different discussion. And then, within that same vein, the character of Boyd from DuckTales, so it's even something that we talk about in children's media, and then it's also the subject of many movies. For example, the character of Samantha in the movie Her, and then the character of Sunny in iRobot. So this is all kind of name-dropping to illustrate that this is a story that's been told before, and I think to describe them all collectively, I think their stories serve to discuss the rights and responsibilities of sentient beings, both individually and in the community, generally speaking. So, just like in Star Trek Voyager, we have the character of the EMH. He is a hologram, what they ultimately call a form of photonic life, which is he's a life form made out of light, and he's a doctor. So what are his ethical responsibilities? To heal people, even if they hurt his friends, if they're his enemies? Can he be reprogrammed? If he is reprogrammed, does that change who he is fundamentally? Is he a person with rights who has the right not to be reprogrammed if he doesn't want to be reprogrammed? Questions like that. Or, Aiko in the Lunar Chronicles, she has a big personality for a robot, and she has hopes and dreams the same way that anyone else does, but do those deserve to be realized? And does that mean that other androids in her position also have that same potential? We just don't know. So these are broadly the kinds of questions that this genre asks. HIVEmind's existence raises similar questions. So does HIVEmind have rights? Does HIVEmind deserve to have opportunities outside of Hive if he wants to? I mean, they're questions we can ask. But this isn't really just a story about rights or brains. It's also about bodies, and specifically HIVEmind's embodiment at Hive as well. So to quickly go over a few events in Escape Velocity, we have first the HIVEmind, the Contessa. The Contessa, Sinistry, decides to kill HIVEmind in order to get key information about who let Otto and pals escape. Then we see HIVEmind's identity subject to variation, partially because he is masking his own, his own personality, his own humanity, and then also the skepticism of the staff. And there will be a few quotes in a minute that will illustrate this, so don't worry if it feels like I'm rushing. I'm not trying to, I just am. And then 3, HIVEmind is embodied outside of the school for the first time as a matter of life and death when he gets to hang out in one of Cypher's old robots. So, threat of death, ambiguous humanity, and then physical embodiment for the first time. And so the question that's being asked in this story, unlike in many other robot stories, is not am I a real boy? But rather, what kind of boy do they expect me to be? Because HIVEmind's humanity is a little bit up for interpretation from folks. Wing is the type of person who doesn't see HIVEmind as a person, whereas Otto and Laura very much do. They think he has rights, and that's that matters, I think. But, and clearly the Contessa, well, I guess, if she would kill people anyway, I don't know if that really works as a reason to disqualify him from being human. So, long story short, whether he's a real boy or not, we have to consider what do they want from him? What is his role in this society? And so we do have a good idea of what he's expected to do, partly because it's explicitly stated, and partly because from our backstory of Overlord, primarily seen in Overlord Protocol, we know what they want him not to be, which is an evil, maniacal, murderous, gonna take over the world type dude. So we don't want that, but they do expect him, we know, to be obedient, to be compliant, to be replaceable, and to be somewhat inhuman. And that's not quite how it turns out, of course, because HIVEmind as a developing person has his own personality. Go figure. Which I think is actually very interesting, because when it comes to direct sci-fi parallels, so parallels that also ask, what kind of person do they expect me to be? The top two I can think of are actually going to be a character from Star Trek's original series. That episode is called A Requiem for Methuselah, and there is a robot in that story that does not know it's a robot, and at the end of the episode there is a serious reckoning about what kind of thing do they need this robot to be. I've seen that episode a lot of times. And then also Star Trek, this time Deep Space Nine, is not actually a robot when we consider this, but rather the character of Julian Bashir, who is an organic life form, but he does have benefit from genetic manipulation, which at their time in their universe is illegal. So I could really get into that, but assuming that most people have not really dealt with Julian Bashir before, I'm just going to throw out there that it's intriguing to me that when it comes to Star Trek comparisons, HIVEmind's likeliest, comparison is a doctor on a space station who is one of the most gay-coded characters in all of Star Trek, and he's just cool. That's all. So, we'll get back to HIVEmind now. So all of that to say, HIVEmind is his story is a little bit off-center for what is typical of the sci-fi genre, but his personality is what makes him one of the most compelling characters, I think. Compelling characters. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, what if he's gay? That's a little bit theatrical, but I did take some time to think about HIVEmind's journey in this story and kind of marry that Pinocchio question to queer theory as a literary enterprise, which, if you're not familiar with queer theory, that is when critics go into a work and examine, sometimes it's about examining kind of latent or subtextual homoerotic content or similar things. It also has a lot to do with psychology. It's a pretty broad field, is what I will say. So, suffice it to say that instead of the question, so essentially what I'm trying to say is, if we take that question, am I a real boy, from Pinocchio, and then add some queer theory to it, the question becomes, well, why is he a boy at all? And so, spoiler alert, this analysis is not going in the direction of being gay, but actually more like transgender or non-binary, but I like using gay as a catch-all phrase. So, why is HIVEmind a boy at all? Important question. Also question, why is Overlord a boy? Why is anyone a boy? That's too broad for today also. But we can talk about HIVEmind, because there's at least a range of right for that. So, I am using the blue British book. It photographs very well, actually. At least looking at myself on my phone. But, As far as I can tell, the page numbers actually match up to the orange version if you have the American copy, so if you care to look, you can. I'm starting on page 124. And in this scene, Miss Leon is crawling through some duct to help save the school. She's eavesdropping on the Contessa deciding to kill HIVEmind. Good times. So, starting kind of a few sentences into the first paragraph. By the sound of things, HIVEmind would not be around to tell them his secrets for very much longer. Logically, she knew that he was just a machine. Indeed, he was only a he, because that was the voice and appearance he had been assigned. It didn't change the fact that she, like everyone else at Hive, had become very used to his calm, reassuring presence around the school. And so, Miss Leon is kind of like she's having deep thoughts in that duct. Although I've never been in a duct. I assume you just have deep thoughts there. But she's kind of explicitly pointing out the fact that HIVEmind doesn't have any physical sex or anything that most humans use to identify a gender socially. Judith Butler is famous for her book, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but she made the claim, Gender Trouble, that's what it is, Gender Trouble by Judith Butler, but the claim that gender is almost entirely presentation, and that you're a gender because that's how you present that way to the world. And the thing about HIVEmind is, for him, it's completely true, because unlike with, say, the character of Data on Star Trek The Next Generation, who does have a physical body that does have, a penis? Sorry. HIVEmind doesn't have a body, so he doesn't have any sex or gender markers outside of what has been programmed into him. And that's interesting. So hold that thought there. Skipping ahead to page 128, we're going to look at, so Miss Leon did her job, which of course she did. She's a great cat. But now the professor is hacking into HIVEmind's brain to try and save his life. So the few lines down, the professor quickly typed a string of commands into this terminal on his desk and swept a pile of papers off a small gray disk that had been hidden beneath them. A ring of blue light illuminated the edge of the disk, and an array of fine lasers projected a pattern into the dust hanging in the air. A moment later, the abstract shape coalesced into the face of HIVEmind. "Good afternoon, Professor," HIVEmind said calmly. "Remotely accessing my core mainframe is in direct contravention of the Contessa's standing orders. Please disconnect immediately." "No," said the professor firmly, "and you can drop the Robot Act too. I need answers." HIVEmind tipped his head to one side, seeming to stare straight at the professor for a few seconds. "As you wish," HIVEmind said with a slight smile. And then he's like, "But the Contessa's gonna get mad at you." But guess what? The Contessa's mad at everyone right now, so does it matter? No. This scene, anyway, I'm highlighting because here is the other thing about HIVEmind, is that he's not just assigned a gender, per se. In this moment, we see he's also kind of been assigned a robot personality, which is, he was meant to be perceived as, like, this calm, logical, easygoing robot. He doesn't have any worries, he doesn't have any concerns, he's just like, hello, here are the rules, I'm a robot. And that's his job. But the people who know him best know that HIVEmind has a lot more going for him than that. The professor says it himself explicitly, you can drop the Robot Act. So they know that he is, like, actually a real person deep down, and then he just, like, pretends to be a robot for the benefit of others. So important point number 2. And then we're skipping ahead to 136 when the Contessa actually goes ahead and gives the order to kill HIVEmind. And then they find out that he was the one who let them escape because it was the right thing to do, as he said. That's another thing. He has like a growing moral conscience of his own. That's so cute. It was him, the operative said quietly. I'm on 136. Did I say that? I don't know. It was him, the operative said quietly. HIVEmind gave Raven access to the launch bay. He was the traitor. What? The Contessa snapped. How could he? I mean, why? I'm afraid we may have just killed the only thing, the operative corrected himself with a slight shake of the head, that could have possibly answered that. And so, his first death, sort of, in the book, ends with them unsure if he was a person or a thing. They're both out there. So, the thing that these 3 quotes, segments have in common is that HIVEmind's perceived self is in constant flux, and he hides his true self constantly, partially for fear of death and partially because we know from the first book that if he's open about who he really is, there's a good chance that he will be reprogrammed to not present any emotional personality traits anymore. Does that have any familiarity for people in the queer community? Gosh. Gonna go ahead and say yes. But to review real quick, our first quote on page 124 talked about HIVEmind's gender presentation in flux. The second one on 128 was about his robot personality in flux. And then his third one on 136 was about the ambiguity of whether HIVEmind is a person or a thing. And all 3 of these together indicate to me that HIVEmind is very much a character who is in between things. And I think that is, like, important, because is he a person or a thing? Well, kind of both. And to be fair, so are we. Is he a robot or a person? Kind of both. And is he a boy or is he something else? Well, again, he's kind of both. He does present as a guy, and nor does he ever seem to resist that, and yet we also know that there's more complicated stuff going on with a computer's gender than is simply present on the surface. So, to go into that a little deeper, or maybe not, the question I wrote down in my notes is HIVEmind programmed to be a man, or does his gender performance fall short of the masculine ideal? And I was like, we can't unpack all that right now. But I did write down a few things, which is that, like, as a robot, HIVEmind is subservient and sexually immature and arguably fragile, which is, like, not, like, the ideal masculinity here in the West. And that's, like, complicated, I guess. This made, like, a lot more sense when I was writing it down. Sorry, guys. Yeah. That is an interesting question, though. Is HIVEmind programmed to be a man, or is he programmed to present as a man? I don't know, guys, but I would love to hear your thoughts. But where I was going with all this is, like, whether he isn't or is programmed to be a man, who cares? That's what we always want to know. Who cares? Who cares if HIVEmind is a dude or not? It would change if HIVEmind was a girl. That goes without saying. But who cares that he's a man or presents as a dude in this series, in this time? Because, underlined 3 times, like HIVEmind, Otto Malpence queers the boundary between organic and mechanical life, and occupying that space is different and scary. So, I sure did connect the dots there. So, The one thing that the other male characters have in this series is an assumption of universality, we'll say. Which is to say that, and I think that's a subject of genre as well, is that sci-fi is often dominated by men. Male characters are kind of assumed to be the default. It's all... I could also go on about that, actually. Specifically about Star Trek, where today is kind of like... I'm slightly mad at Star Trek Day, but... universality, and so this doesn't take into account things like race or queerness or anything like that, but just that, like, in sci-fi, it's just generally that, like, your default character is a man. So, not even necessarily that, like, I think the best example of this is, like, when you talk about technicians who are in the background at Hive or something, it's like, they're all guys. Or if you talk about the guards, they're guys. They're all men. It's never like, and then a cool girl guard knocked out block and tackle. It's just guys. And so, it's just kind of a norm or average in there. And it's certainly complicated by things like Wing being Asian or by whatever Franz and Nigel have going on for them. But, as a shorthand, we'll just say that men kind of have an assumption of universality as the default in this series so far. Which is interesting then because of who we find out that number one is. He's a man, a white man, as we figure out, but he's also Overlord. And that to me is very interesting because the same body kind of has number one, who could be representative of the universality or defaultness of men as a gender, plus Overlord, who seeks to be the universality of machines in the world. He wants to, like, kill everyone, ? And we never really got to see Overlord, like, accomplish his, like, true goals in this book, so it's hard to tell, like, what his dream world would have been, you know. But obviously he would have been in charge, and he would have been universally present in it, so it all balances out in the end. So, with this reveal of number one being Overlord, we discover that the combination of these two things, which is manhood and machines, artificial intelligence, in an attempt at universality, I can't talk today, in an attempt at universality, has actually made them into a completely unique individual. There is nobody else like Overlord / number one on the planet, which is in fact the problem, because that's why he needed Otto. He needed someone who was exactly the same as him to take over the next host body. And that's the thing about when you're an individual, you are alone, which I think also is very present in this one. I'm gonna jump to 308 real quick, but Otto just finds out about all of this, pretty much, and he's thinking about his abilities, and then Otto realized with horror that he was barely a human being at all, more a walking, talking systems unit for a homicidal artificial intelligence. And he finds out that he never had parents, and he's like, now I'm not a real person. So what really happens is, like, HIVEmind's question this whole time has been like, well, who do they want me to be? And the big reveal at the end is that it's Otto who's having the, am I a real boy? crisis at the end. And so even though he's an organic person, the fact that he has a computer in his brain makes him question whether he is human at all. And so, like HIVEmind then, Otto kind of takes on this burden of a taboo existence where he's not really, like, the right kind of person. He's not a universal person anymore. And so then if they find out who he is, Otto doesn't know how to deal with it because he doesn't really know who he is either. So like that's the big question, is what do you do when you're alone? What do you do when your humanity is in such flux like this? And initially Otto asks Dr. Nero to kill him, which is not great. I'm heading to 329, the big ol' climax. And I'm just starting at the top of the page. Overlord says, "You're still no match for me. You're just a ghost in the machine. Your body belongs to me now." "You're forgetting one thing," Otto said. "Here, I'm as strong as I want to be." "Ha!" Overlord laughed dismissively. "You really think that you can defeat me? I am a higher order of intelligence. I can think 1,000 times faster than you and react 1,000,000 times more quickly." Tendrils of red energy snaked out from Overlord's hovering face, spearing into Otto's body, eating away at his floating golden form. Otto felt himself fading. He was suddenly finding it hard to think. "You can't win. You're just another pathetic human. It's barely worth the effort of destroying you. Perhaps I should just leave you here, floating endlessly in the void alone." "Who said," Otto gasped as more tendrils snaked into his virtual body, "that I was alone?" Otto's whole body flared bright blue, the azure light coursing through the tentacles that connected him to Overlord and around the edges of the crystalline facets of the monster's face. Overlord screamed with rage as Otto's body flared gold again, sending pulses of energy along the conduits that bound them together. Overlord's face began to crumble, individual polygons blinking out of existence, as the blue light crept across his face, slowly reducing it to a wireframe shell. And then HIVEmind's there, and it's great, and we love him. But that is very much relevant, because I think, why is HIVEmind a boy at all? Well, the answer to that in queer theory is because society agrees he is. And I think the same can be said for humanity. Why is this person a person? Because society agrees that he belongs with us, that he is one of our own kind. And that is also the true victory at the end of this book, is that Otto has a connection to a similar being that destroys the universality that Overlord threatens to his individual body. Is Otto a person at the end of this book? Yes, because HIVEmind said, "You're going to be with your people again." And he did, and that is so important. And I think in just another offset of thinking in this as a queer representation moment, it's often true for people as well who are have a non-normative sexuality or gender, that a big part of their experience is not just having those feelings for themselves, but having those feelings in a community with friends and family who love them and say, "Well, you belong in this society with me as well, and we are of the same kind." So, all in all, I think HIVEmind is a really unique character. It's interesting to me that he chooses to hide his true personality among his allies, and it's interesting to me that HIVEmind challenges the boundaries of personhood and normative human existence, including gender. And then it's also interesting to me that HIVEmind's ultimate sacrifice for Otto is important because they have a sameness. Even though Otto is embodied organically, and throughout this book, HIVEmind has been embodied mechanically, at the end, they're both there in Otto's mind, and HIVEmind is like, this body is for you, and you need to live in it and take in it, and it will be good. And then HIVEmind, as I said in the beginning, his vital function is bringing people together. It's about the collective as a community, and Otto is safely returned to his collective at the end. To sound like 7 of 9, for anyone who, like, does know about Star Trek who's watching this. And that is also kind of ironic as well, because I think Hive is to the individual what Hive as a collective is to individuality what Overlord's unique drone idea is to a deadly universality, which is to say that Hive is a collective made up of people who have their own thoughts and do their own things, but they're all united by the things they're doing at the school and the fact that they live at the same place at the same time and they're hanging out together, and that makes them a community. Whereas Overlord kind of does create the possibility of a hive mind, where his consciousness and Otto's would occupy the same body at the same time, and that this could potentially happen to others, maybe. And if that's the case, then even though everybody will be a unique drone, everyone will be the same, and that will be the death of community in and of itself. So, even though he dies, HIVEmind at his core gives life, and there is real hope for Otto at the end. And I think this hints at the fact that Otto has a life-giving nature in himself as well. And that, I think, helps set the tone for the next book. So, thanks again to Jade for letting me talk for almost 40 minutes about whatever the heck I wanted, and thanks, guys. We'll see you next time, I guess. Bye!
So that's escape velocity. The discussion question this week, which we still haven't had anybody answer any of the previous discussion questions, the discussion question this week is, what do you think that Glove should be trying to do? Right now we know that they basically do a bunch of odd jobs trying to take over the planet in little tiny ways, and they manipulate the government in a few different ways. But if you were running the world's most powerful supervillain league, what do you think they should be doing? What do you think they should be spending their time on? What would Glove be like if you were number one? Yeah. So next week we are covering, or actually at the end of this week, I swear, we're covering Interception Point, also known as the one where they stop a runaway train, I think. The one with the train. I don't remember what this one's about. I remember almost nothing about it. Yeah. See you next week.